This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. In her poem, The Summer Day, Mary Oliver writes, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Turns out Mary Oliver did a lot with her life. She's one of the great American poets of the 20th century, known for capturing the beauty of the natural world. A new documentary takes a closer look at Oliver's life and work. It's called Mary Oliver, Saved by the Beauty of the World. The film premieres on PBS tonight at 9 p.m. Around the film's theatrical debut, David First was in the host chair. He was joined by director Sasha Waters and Gabrielle Calvacaresi, a featured poet in the film. Sasha explained what she wanted people to learn about Mary Oliver's life and work that maybe they didn't know before.
I mean, I think Mary Oliver is the kind of poet, the kind of person who, when you mention her name, people either know who she is right away and are huge fans, or the opposite, like they've heard her name, but they really have no idea who she was. But again, I think you mentioned that one line, "Tell me what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." That really resonates with people, and they go, aha, that's Mary Oliver. Okay. So I think this idea of, Mary, when she was alive, and even when she was sort of ascendant in what we might call her celebrity in the later years of her life, she really wanted the attention to be on her work, not on her. In her letters, she will tell her publishers, please sell the work, don't sell me. But I do think people are so curious about Mary as a person and her life. And her life story really is in some ways like a fairy tale, that we wanted to showcase the poetry, some of the really wonderful beloved poems, some of the less well-known poems, but also get to know who the writer was behind the poetry as well.
And she was certainly gave all appearances as a private person.
Yes.
Do you think she would be resistant to the idea of such a documentary?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think I don't know whether or not she was approached to be the subject of a documentary while she was still alive. But she did agree to be the subject of a biography. So Lindsay Whalen is her biographer, and she's featured in the film and was also a very important consultant on the film project throughout the research and the editing process. And so she did work with Lindsay while she was still alive. Lindsay is still working on the biography. There's so much rich material to dig into there. So I think that she did know that her life story, not just the poetry, but also her life story, had something that could help people in the world. And so I feel like when she left behind her archive, she knew that she was doing it in such a way that other people would find it, would dig into it, the letters, the correspondence, the fan mail, etc.
The whole life.
Mm-hmm.
We're also here with poet Gabrielle Calvacaresi. And Gabrielle, could you tell us a little bit about her partner, Molly Malone Cook, who was a photographer? They got together when Mary was quite young, right? And they remained together until Molly's death in 2005.
Yeah. I think one of the things, Sasha, and I imagine you would agree, and I think it's one of the reasons people are really interested in Mary, is Mary was also part of a great love story.
Yes.
And that's something many of us want for ourselves. Some of us are lucky to have it. Some of us keep dreaming about it. Molly Malone Cook was a person who was an artist in her own right, a profound reader, and also someone who, through the course of Mary's career, gave Mary what is perhaps the greatest wealth of all, which is privacy and time for them to get their work done, right? One of the things that I was always struck by when I heard about Molly, and that has been before Mary died, and then also when I'm on the road talking about Mary Oliver, often people who knew both of them will come and say hello to me, is that Molly was this sort of fortress and wall between Mary and the outside world in terms of what she saw as part of her commitment, job, however we want to talk about it, was to give Mary space and time to write poems. They were a couple who lived out in Provincetown, Massachusetts for much of their life, had really no money to speak of, but they made a life together in which Mary could make art, where Molly could be taking photographs, working in this remarkable bookstore, doing all kinds of things that really allowed Mary to become the poet that we think of today as giving us the poems that, a lot of people would say have really changed their lives.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite moments in the documentary, and I'm not gonna do justice to it because I'm not gonna remember it exactly right. But at one point in the documentary, we hear Mary Oliver say that they were talkers,
Yeah.
the two, and that they carried on a conversation that lasted for 4 decades, and it's such a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I that's something I've always heard about them. And, a little bit like Emily Dickinson, we hear a lot about Mary as a kind of hermit. But the truth is that while she was very private, she had a very strong social circle, and they were always talking to each other. But one thing I've found on the road, and I imagine, Sasha, you found this as you talk to people, there were a lot of friends. There were a lot of people who were part of their lives, and conversation was a big part of that.
Absolutely, and I think the year-round community in Provincetown is so small that you would just sort of naturally be bonded to the people who are there through the winter, and maybe you're having deep conversations and talking about books, or maybe you're just running into people at the Stop and Shop or the old IGA, right? And seeing those people who are the year-round residents of this small, tight-knit community.
I want to play a clip from the documentary, her talking about her relationship to nature, and we'll hear a few voices in this clip.
I call it primary sources. Some people go to the library, but I went to the woods.
She went into the woods with her questions, which is exactly what the great proponents of her tradition in American poetry encouraged her to do. Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau say, you don't need a spiritual teacher. You need to go out into the world and look.
I drive people crazy because I could sit for 2 hours and look at the clouds and be very silent, and I'm having a nice time. And sometimes I'm with people who say, this is kind of nuts.
I would say to Mary, I know you're crawling around the woods talking to animals. They're going to put you in a mental institution. And then she got bit once by a badger. I said, that's what you get. She was down there, helping him build the dam. Get out of there.
Okay, that was undoubtedly the voice right there of filmmaker John Waters speaking at the end. And just to clarify, Sasha Waters, no relation?
No relation. But my father was an artist whose name was John Waters. And
also John Waters.
My father was the only John Waters in New York City when I was growing up. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and my dad, John Waters, was the only John Waters in the phone book. And so, sorry, this is a little bit of an aside, but there was a time in the, like in the late 70s and early 80s when John Waters, the filmmaker, was ascendant, but people didn't necessarily associate him with Baltimore. And so my dad, being the only John Waters in New York City, would get these invitations to parties and nightclubs at the Palladium area it was later than Studio 54, addressed to John Waters, the filmmaker. And so he would bring them home to me when I was in high school, and I would go. And so when I met John...
You're not going to pass up that invitation.
No, of course not. So when I met John, the filmmaker, I had to apologize to him for stealing all of his party invitations when I was in high school.
I like to suspect that he was totally okay with that.
He was okay with that.
That's an incredible. If any aside you have along those lines, please jump right in, because the lesson there is if you get an invitation.
That's right. You just go.
To a John Waters party, you go.
Right. I want to say, though, that was John in the clip, and he's so funny through the film, which is important because I think it's important to have these moments of laughter and levity in a film that is also dealing with some heavy subject matter. But I do want to say the first voice we hear in that clip after Mary's is the great poet Mark Doty, who was Gabrielle's teacher and has taught in so many places at Sarah Lawrence, where Gabrielle went, at NYU, at Columbia, at Iowa. And he is someone who I think really, even though we talk in the film about how Mary was ignored by a lot of people in the Academy, Mark Doty was someone that really, I think, always taught her work and passed that tradition of nature poetry along to a younger generation. Wouldn't you say so, Gabby?
Oh, yeah. Mark was my very first poetry teacher, which is just a wild thing to say. And at Sarah Lawrence College. And, I was thinking about it. That was 1992. So that's the year the Selected Poems, I think, comes out. That green cover, that sort of iconic cover. And yeah, Mark, I had gotten the book and I had looked through it, but I had been reading it. But it was really Mark and also the poet Michael Klein, also who was in Provincetown at that time, who really taught me about Mary Oliver. Yeah, Mark has been one of the great proponents of Mary's work since I knew him.
Was she disregarded by some because some people consider nature poetry to be something that shouldn't be in the same category as other poetry? I guess I just don't understand.
I would say Gabrielle could probably speak to this with more and deeper knowledge than I have. But my understanding, I think in some ways, just like in any art form, there are rising and falling trends and styles. And so there was a moment where poetry, particularly poetry by women, was quite confessional. Mary's not kind of in that vein. But I don't know, Gabby, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different reasons that maybe, and it's
Sometimes
David,
popularity, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think among poets there was certainly jealousy. I think that this idea of, on one hand, the poems are not confessional, and yet, like, a person who's going to say to you, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And say it to you in a way that is not judgmental, that is not saying, like, your life is a piece of trash right now. What are you going to do with it? But it's actually saying, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at you, I'm going to ask you this question, and there's a feeling of, I'm going to wait for the answer too, and maybe there isn't one. That's really radical. And I think particularly in that moment, I think Mary Oliver was probably pretty threatening to a lot of people. At the same time, it's really interesting to say that at a moment where, she was packing 5,000 seat theaters. Most people loved her.
We're just about out of time, which is so upsetting because I have about 1,000 other questions I want to ask you. Maybe just some thoughts, Gabrielle, about her life in Provincetown.
Yeah, it's really something to move to the edge of the world. And Provincetown is a kind of ending, the kind of continental ending, at the same time that it's also a real beginning for a lot of people. It's a place where lots of different kinds of folks come together, but certainly thinking about the LGBTQ community, that is a space of tremendous welcome and a place where one can, yes, have privacy, make your art. The light there is so extraordinary. It's also a place where you can sort of redefine, come to a new understanding of who you might be. One of the things Mary Oliver says in one of her remarkable essays is she talks about making for herself a handsome life. And I always think, like, that's something you can do in Provincetown. You can decide who you want to be in the world.
That was guest host David First, speaking with director Sasha Waters and poet Gabrielle Calvacaresi. The documentary Mary Oliver, Saved by the Beauty of the World, airs on PBS tonight at 9 p.m. And that is all of it for today. I'm Allison Stewart. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you. And I'll meet you back here next time.